Welcome back to another edition of Elevate Your Grind, brought to you by the Cannabis Lab. I am your host, Todd Rosales, and I am very sorry that I did not have an episode for you guys last week. I know a lot of you were probably sitting in your rooms, shivering, crying, wondering where I was, upset that I wasn't there to speak to you and give you the best of what the cannabis industry has to offer. But I got a day job, I got kids, I got a family. Yeah, I know it's not an excuse, but I was too lazy to book a show last week. I got busy and never booked one. So I'm here with you this week. And because of that, I think we have a great guest to make up for the fact that we didn't have one last week, folks. Before I get into today's episode, this episode will be brought to you by the annual Cannabis Lab Conference, the annual C Lab Conference, folks. This is one of the best events of the year. You guys have been to MJ Biz, you've been to the NCIA events. As far as Florida cannabis goes and really national cannabis goes, this is an amazing event. We will have speakers from all over the country. We will have most of the major MSOs in attendance, specifically all of the Florida MMTCs. There'll be a huge patient population there. This is not an event to miss. 2019, October 2019, I went unemployed to the last true C-Lab conference. There was another one in between during COVID times. It was outdoors. I didn't get to go to it, so I just counted it as not ever existing, although I heard it was really good. But the 2019, the last time we had a real C-Lab conference, I was unemployed. And that was really the start of my cannabis career. That's where I started building my network. That's where I was able to get this podcast going and end up where I'm sitting now, working with Ricky and the team at Heisman. So if you also want to be a cannabis executive, you better attend. No, but on a serious note, folks, whether you have established your cannabis career and you're looking to just expand your network, whether you're looking to get into the industry, if you're an MMTC that has been established in Florida, or any of you new licensees that we don't know about yet that have your license and want to come to the show and tell us all about your plans, please do that. Go to joinclab.com. Check that out. It is going to be a great time. All right. So today's guest, you know, it's interesting. Again, I always say part of the reason that I do this show is because I get to meet a lot of interesting people at a lot of interesting events. So rewind before that C-Lab conference, I want to say it was like August 2019. I'm out in San Jose at the NCIA conference. It was a great conference. I had a great time. I met a lot of great people there as well. And I happened to ride up the elevator with a gentleman, and then I rode down the elevator with him, and we both happened to see that we were wearing our NCIA badges, and we started talking. Turns out he worked for the CSE. At the time, I was working for a venture capital group. We were doing finance-focused events, so we decided to talk, and I said, you guys would be a great addition. He said, you got to meet my CEO. We sat down, and we've had a great relationship ever since. I'm no longer with that organization, so literally the folks at the CSE has just stayed friends with me. I can't list them. I can't give them companies. I don't know the investors or anything else. They're just a good group of people. So with that being said, I want to bring in the leader of those people, Richard Carleton, the CEO of the Canadian Securities Exchange. Richard, thank you for joining me.
Todd, my pleasure. Great to be here.
Absolutely. I know that, you know, I always make the joke that people are slumming it here on our show, but dude, you're the head of the Canadian Securities Exchange. You're on like C-SPAN and MSNBC and like all like the major financial shows. And here you are talking to some kid in South Florida sitting in his office who thinks he has a show. Who knows if we even publish these? You guys might be just talking to me for my own advice.
As somebody once said, it's been a long, strange trip in the cannabis industry, Todd. So you just never know who and where you're going to wind up.
Yeah, you guys are all over the place, and it's interesting to me because I feel like you function different than the exchanges here for the fact that you guys have a great marketing engine behind you. You know, I look at your website, the blogs, the podcasts, the web series that you guys do. It is so educational and so informative. And then you look at what we have here in the States, and like, I don't see like, man, I could be wrong. I don't pay attention to it. The New York Stock Exchange putting out their own stuff. We have all these crazy media networks that put it out and kind of put their own spin on it too. I'm interested to know, is that just a product of how exchanges function in each country? Or, you know, I'm curious to know what led you guys to create that excellent marketing engine that you have.
Well, I think it's really a function of being a startup. We have a roughly 20-year history now under our belts, and as we like to say, a 20-year overnight success. And again, I know that every entrepreneur listening, can tell the same story, because we're not all like Facebook, going from zero to multiple billions of dollars of market cap in 5 years or whatever it was. But no, it's taken a lot of hard work, and clearly, there was no sense of entitlement either in our team, or, nothing came easily for us. We had to make it ourselves. And so did we have people opening up spots on the traditional mainline media, whether that's print or electronic, in Canada or internationally from the get-go? No, absolutely not. So we had to get out, tell our story, do what we could to provide education for the issuer community, for investors, for the corporate finance folks that were beginning to work with the exchange back in the day. And so this is really part of how you have to build these sorts of communities in the 21st century, using as you mentioned, the social media platforms, variety of different resources that we apply to the situation. And I'm glad to say that here we are 20 years later with obviously a significant cohort of early stage capital companies under our belts. And now, as you know, the biggest names in the cannabis world who elected to work with us starting about 5-6 years ago, listed on the exchange, and obviously the foremost provider of capital, public capital, to the cannabis industry globally. And it's been a fun ride. It's been a great trip.
It's interesting because if it wasn't for the CSE, I don't think the U.S. cannabis industry would be where it is today, right? Because you wouldn't have access to all of that capital, right? So, I don't remember how old the article I read was, but you said 5 years ago you guys made the decision to accept U.S., not just cannabis companies, but U.S. cannabis companies. I got to be honest. I know that I don't remember the exact timeline. I remember Canada probably was not 100% federally legal at the time. Maybe I'm wrong, but I imagine that couldn't have been an easy decision for you all, just because of the legalities around it and it being federally illegal in the US. But again, to me, you guys are early pioneers, and there's a lot of talk in the cannabis industry about the early pioneers and the activists and the people who kind of, took the licks and maybe in jail, or they're not here anymore. And we kind of stand on their shoulders to get to where we are. And I love that. And I love that we respect the history, but there's also, I think there's this new age of advocates that take a different chance, where it's an advocate like the CSE, where it is a public, I don't know the right word to say it, because I know finance has a lot of legal terms, but essentially it's an institution that's taking a chance on a substance that hasn't been approved yet, and allowing it to thrive and allowing it to turn into the market. And because of that, obviously we've seen all the benefits from cannabis. But I'd love to, because I know you're in charge, then take me kind of back to 2000, I guess it was 2015, 16, 17, when you guys made that decision, like, okay, we're going to list these companies and we're going to be the home for them, and we're going to help them turn into actual companies and grow and thrive and make this a real industry. I mean, again, if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't have these names being able to access this capital.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. And I will say, we do get a lot of respect from the industry as we go, not just in Canada and the United States, but frankly around the world for the leadership position that we took. But really, I guess if we want to, sort of walk back the history, it was really two steps. Our decision-making process. So the first step was back in the spring of 2014. And Canada had provided, and as a result of a court decision, which had opened up the medical program in Canada. And there was a belief that with the government getting out of the cultivation of the required cannabis for the medical market, which again was expected to grow quite significantly as a result of the court decisions on access to medical cannabis, you had a number of entrepreneurs decide that it was time to raise capital, build businesses that were focused on the cultivation of cannabis to supply what was expected to be a growing medical market in Canada. And, that's obviously, as all of your listeners, viewers know, a very capital intensive phase of the business, because again, you had to provide indoor grow with tight security, and again, very specific requirements in terms of LED lighting, HVAC, all the stuff that we know, sort of much better now. And let's just say, and I don't want to throw any shade on our competitors necessarily, but the entrepreneurs that were looking to raise public capital, because again, as was the experience a few years later in the United States, you didn't have traditional sources of private equity or venture capital open to these folks. There was to be blunt, even though these folks were operating legal businesses, still the stigma attached to the cannabis industry. And so a few of the pioneers, folks like Bruce Linton and Cam Fowler and Terry Booth at Aurora, and some of the other early industry leaders decided to take their companies public, and were able to raise significant amounts of capital in order to finance the development of these primarily cultivation operations, and did so successfully. And the Canadian Securities Exchange, by virtue of our early embrace of these companies, found ourselves in a situation where we went from just a small handful in, I want to say, March of 2014 to about 30 or 35 companies by the middle of the summer that year. So that really put our stamp on the industry as a trusted partner, as an opportunity for these companies to raise capital. And we really went from strength to strength in the Canadian space. And roughly a couple of years later, in fact, the first company that approached us was out of the state of Washington in the fall of 2015. And we obviously did have to do a lot of thinking about the legality issues. Were we going to be thrown in jail for aiding and abetting the commission of federal crimes, money laundering issues, various other things. People told us that I wasn't going to be able to cross the border anymore, that our Nexus cards would be taken away, all sorts of bad things were going to happen. But we concluded after quite careful analysis that a company operating legally at the state level was okay. And from a public capital markets perspective, we had the Securities Exchange Commission in the United States approving a prospectus for a public company that touched the plan. So we viewed that if a U.S. federal agency is in fact permitting the securities of one of these companies to be sold to the public, through the security system in the United States, that combined with a number of other factors gave us the assurance that we needed that these companies were operating in accordance with local laws. And we determined that we could, in fact, list the company and permit it to raise funds and issue their securities and trade the stocks and all of that. And that trickle of US issuers became a flood in 2016. And the real catalyst, of course, was the legalization proposition that was on the California ballot during the midterm elections, and sorry, not the midterm elections, but the election of 2016. And with that, as I say, you saw a rush of companies and in particular investment into the US cannabis space in the fall of 2016. So again, to fast forward, I guess, to today, the US multi-state operators have raised 16 billion Canadian through the facilities of the Canadian Securities Exchange, dating back to 5-6 years. And as I was quoted in Bloomberg a few weeks ago, even though that's Canadian dollars, it's still not chump change when you convert it back to US. So yes, it was a considerable amount of the growth capital that was raised by the US MSO community. And a trend which obviously hasn't slowed down at all this year. Almost $4.5 billion has been raised this year by the US industry. And we're beginning to see now, of course, more and more different techniques being used so that not only are the companies able to issue shares, but for example, we saw Trulieve close a $350 million debt financing transaction just last month, a considerably lower coupon than what we've seen demanded from lenders, previously. So the cost of capital is coming down. And there's no doubt that the multi-state operators are using their advantage of being public companies and lower capital costs to both finance acquisitions and organic growth as more and more states open up for medical and adult recreational purposes.
So, obviously that's a lot to digest and it's a huge history, but you guys, you to me, it was the catalyst, right? And I have a horrible story, and that's just kind of the way that this show goes. But I remember all the way back when I was taking my high school SATs, the year I took them, they had this little experimental section, which was a writing section. So you did your reading section, you did your math section, you were there for 5 hours already, and at the end of the test, they asked, okay, if anybody wants to stay and do another hour and a half, 2 hours for this experimental writing section, we'll refund you the cost of the test. And it was like 65 or 75 bucks. I remember I was like 50, I had to be 16 years old because I drove myself there. And I remember I raised my hand and I go, are you giving us the money or are you refunding the card
My
that paid for
parents.
the test? Well, they were refunding the card to pay for the test. Well, sorry, mom and dad. At that point, I didn't really give a shit. I wanted to go home. And I raised my hand. I said, I'm good. I'm out. The entire room got up behind me and left. And they just said, I didn't want to be the a-hole who said no first. I'm like, we just took a 5 hour test. I'm not doing that again. As crude as that analogy is, you guys were kind of the me in that situation where you said, we're willing to allow this to trade, to bring capital to it. You talked about back then, even though it was a perfectly legal business, that there was still a huge stigma around it because it was still drugs, right? It was still weed and everything that was bad about it. But because you allowed it to trade on the exchange, and I don't say allow, but you guys made the decision to bring the listings and everything else, you kind of said, no, it's okay. It is okay. This is a new community of cannabis. This is legal. We're going to do it right. We're going to see the good side of this plant. We're undoing, 100 years of injustice. And because of that, you allow these companies to get big enough to where they have reputations that it's now a very attractive asset class for even people who still see the stigma, where they're like, you know what? If I can't beat him, join him, at least I can make some money off of it. So now in today's time, whereas the access to capital markets was very restricted, you guys have kind of blown it wide open where you have more VC funds coming in, more private equity funds coming in. There are so many more vehicles that people are leveraging just to go public to access capital. I mean, it seems like there's a new SPAC in the cannabis industry every other week. So, it's crazy to me, but it really, I look at it as from a legal standpoint, from a monetary standpoint. You guys were the original advocate that said it is okay to back this industry. It's going to change the world.
Yeah, well, I'd like to say that the fact that we felt that we were on the right side of history was a motivating influence. And to be honest, it really wasn't. I mean, we're looking at this in a very legalistic regulator sort of way. And that was, are we satisfied that the company is operating legally, and have they properly disclosed the risks of operation, the opportunities, the bad things that can happen to shareholders? I mean, all of the stuff that we expect any other legally operating business to do. Now, with that took a lot of effort and time, for the companies themselves and their advisors, because there was no template. Right. The first prospectuses that were drafted, the disclosure statements, again, I hate to, turn this into a discussion of high finance, Todd, but, the management discussion and analysis and the risk factor discussion, this was all being done for the first time. And so I have a ton of respect for the company executives and their advisors who had to, think through all of this stuff for the first time. And because there was no template, there was no, there wasn't like you could look and see what the guy did last month, for the mining exploration company or the technology company or the whatever. This was, really something that the companies themselves had to create, for out of thin air, really. And, I really do have a ton of respect for those management teams. Because they were they were having to solve a ton of problems, not just this one, because of course, as your the viewers well know, these management teams have to deal in a situation where their federal taxes, they can't deduct business expenses from their federal corporate tax.
Yep.
They can't deal with credit card companies, they can't access payroll services for their employees, they can't provide insurance in the same way that other businesses can. So the finance problems were really, I think, a very small part of the challenge that they had to overcome. And as I say, when we talk to these people, which we do on a regular basis, I'm just overwhelming with admiration in terms of all that they have overcome to get where they are now, which many of them in very, very strong positions in the markets that they're serving.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I mean, that's again a big reason why I started this show, is because I've always been kind of enthralled with entrepreneurship, and not even just entrepreneurship to the people who are the original founders, but just the folks who are able to think outside the box as a number 2 or 3 or 4 in an organization, some of these executives and, these management teams working as a team to, like you said, create something from nothing. Regulations, everything in this industry seems to be, we'll figure it out as we're going. And it's so funny. You're in this industry long enough, you start hearing these quips or these jokes, and I get so sick of them because you hear them all the time. But being in cannabis is like dog ears, right? Everybody uses that one. It's played out. I hate hearing it, but it is true. And you know what? The outside world doesn't know our jokes, so if you guys want to still use that one, and then the other one is building the airplane while you're flying. If I had a buck for every time I've heard that term in a pitch, or that I've actually used in a pitch, I wouldn't need to work for a cannabis company, right? So we're all building the airplanes while we're flying. There's a whole bunch of half-built airplanes in the air right now, and who knows which one of them are going to land. But and I make fun of the jokes, but it is true. Like, so we started Heisman, and there's a whole bunch of things that we thought that made logical sense. And when we go to market, it's like, no, it doesn't happen that way. You have to do it this way. It's like, well, we talked to X, Y, and Z, and they said you do it this way. They're like, oh, that was last month. This month you do it that way. And it's like, oh, okay, well, that's fun. How do we get the newsletter that gives us those updates? It doesn't exist. So, it is interesting. It's funny to even see the maturity and the progress that this industry has made. And I think I was just watching an interview that you gave a year or two back, where a lot of the early companies was grow at all costs. It was get your capital, move into new markets, expand your retail footprint. And I feel like a lot of them, I don't want to say they shot themselves in the foot, because they didn't know they were shooting themselves in the foot. One of the last major industries we saw grow up was tech. And as a tech company, you can expand, user adoption, get more users, and then boom, you can flip the switch and monetize and go from nothing to a lot of money immediately. I think we slowly realized this isn't tech. This isn't any of the newer industries that we basically pulled an ancient industry from the past and brought it to the future and tried to treat it like a modern industry. And then we realized plants can only grow as fast as plants can grow. Like, product can only move across, from point A to point B as fast as it can go. Regulators only work so fast, and as fast as you think they work, double it, because that's how long it's going to take. Not your regulators, the ones here. But to that point, like, it's really interesting. I'm sure you've had a front row seat to all of it, seeing the change in business strategies from a lot of the major, both Canadian and US MSOs, from that tech-minded grow to, whoa, we need to dial in SOPs. We need to figure out supply chains. We need to stay where we are, figure it out. And then I think now we're seeing a lot more growth by acquisition, as opposed to just apply for license. It'd be interesting to hear your take on how you've seen the industry change kind of at a high level over the past few years.
Yeah, Todd, I think that's a great summary of the transition.
Then I just took your whole story.
No, not at all. Again, my friend Mitch Berukowitz said at the MJ Biz conference, he said, when was the last time you heard somebody in a pitch say, we've got 250,000 square feet of grow fully funded, right? and that was something that, circa 2016, 2017, that's all you heard.
Yep.
The mantra was seed to sale, vertically integrated. And of course, what comes along with that is, that you had to, as one of the early entrants in the business, the expectation of investors was that you were going to control, as you say, the full supply chain from seed to sale. And of course, the realization eventually began to set in that, ultimately, in an adult recreational use market, you're a consumer packaged good. And, we actually know a lot about developing consumer packaged goods business. And one of them is that, Anheuser-Busch makes a lot of money. They have high margins. They invest a tremendous amount in marketing and brand presence and product positioning and product development and all of that stuff. And the poor guy growing the hops is not capturing the high end of the value chain.
Mhm.
Like, we know that. And in fact, I suspect that Anheuser-Busch doesn't own, a nickel of those assets. In fact, that's, people that specialize in either, cultivating specific craft hops for specific products, or somebody who's really good at delivering low cost hops at scale. But it ain't Anheuser-Busch, it's not S.A. Miller, it's not any of the other global conglomerates that are actually spending the money and investing in, either higher quality or lower cost, right? And so you're right, we have seen that, and of course the Canadians, who were the first to the party, and who most heavily invested in the cultivation assets and, cheered on by the market as a result, are now continuing to spend, they've got years of work ahead of them to clean up the balance sheet, to get those assets either rationalized or off the sheet altogether, and focus on, the high value or the high margin elements of the value chain, which is brand. It may be, again, well, the consumer packaged goods, different delivery mechanisms, whether it's vapes or dab, flower, other extracted products. Again, that's where the margins are. And of course, to contrast between Canada and the United States, Canadian advertising rules are extremely harsh, arguably more difficult than for tobacco in present day terms, which makes it incredibly challenging for the Canadian LPs to develop the kind of consumer loyalty, brand awareness, and all of the things that are required to build a sustainable consumer packaged goods business. Whereas the US counterparts do, in fact, in a variety of states, have the ability to build that kind of brand awareness and develop, a high value, high margin, or have the opportunity to build a high value, high margin business. And we see that that's where companies are headed. And again, if we look at other consumer packaged goods business, we also know what it's going to look like when we get there. And it will look like, other consumer packaged goods businesses, which is you have a small number of conglomerates who provide consistent quality, low price, low, perhaps lacking in the specific qualities that a small subset of consumers who will support craft growers and craft product producers or niche providers. And it will be very difficult for people to operate in the middle. So, as I say, you'll see a few of the, people, the Nestle's, the Crafts, or whatever, and maybe it will be the Nestle's and the Crafts ultimately who wind up owning those companies. And then again, I believe that there is a lot of room for locally supported, locally sourced brands that build local loyalty within the specific markets that they serve.
100%. I love that explanation of it. Obviously, I'm a little partial to branding, considering what I do for a living every day. But, it blows my mind that realistically, like, cannabis branding, until I want to say almost the last 6 months, was we have good weed. Like that was the extent of the branding. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of cool graphics and images and fonts and pictures and things that went along with it, but there really was no, and are no to this point, with the exception of cookies, like a lifestyle. I want to be a part of that brand. And even at that point, we have this discussion at Heisman a lot. I had this discussion at Spring Big a lot when I was there. You see cookies, and it's in PacSun, and it's in Zoomies, and it's in all these places, at least their apparel. And you see someone who's wearing cookies, and you kind of can make some assumptions about them and what they're about and everything else. But that's what the whole point of cookies is. And Berner has done an amazing job understanding who his audience is and speaking to them. But a lot of brands just assume that their audience are people who like smoking weed and nothing beyond that, right? They like smoking good weed. And with that, I don't see any brand loyalty. I don't see any of that coming, because, like, if you're out of the one brand that has really good weed, I'm going to try the other brand that has really good weed. Or even if you have brand A, I'm still going to try brand B, because both your reputations is you have really good weed. Where we're coming with Heisman as a differentiator, and this is obviously self-serving for me, is we're a community of people who enjoy a certain type of activities like watching sports or playing sports or participating, and integrating weed into that lifestyle. So as we go out, we're bringing what we believe to be the best that's available to the consumers. And I would love to see more brands that are like that, you know, whether it's an outdoorsy brand that's like, hey, we're hikers and climbers and bikers, and we integrate weed into our lifestyle, or if it's, you know, music based or whatever. And it kind of does blow my mind that that's now just happening, that you're now just seeing it, right? And it's not just a California weed brand that's coming out and saying, oh, we're a really good California weed brand, so now we're going to be in Michigan and New Jersey and Ohio and Arizona. You know, I'm really looking for the brands that have these lifestyle look and feel. So I love seeing the way that the industry is going. And then the other part about that I really love seeing, and again, I think you guys kind of led this, was the amount of R&D that we can see happening because people have funding, because they have the ability, and because there are free markets that allow competition, the different form factors that we're seeing coming. So my number one thing that I love seeing improvement, vape cartridges, right? We remember the vape cartridges, they were all the same. They were all distillate. They all had like coconut oil, all this crap in it. And we all thought it was the greatest invention because it didn't really smell, and there really wasn't much in the way of secondhand smoke, and you didn't need to ignite anything. It was just super convenient. Then VapeGate happened, and obviously most of this came from the black market. But today, the vape pen that I buy now, at least in California in 2021 versus what I was buying in 2017, almost is like smoking the actual plant to me, right? Now, I know there's a ton of other R&D out there that are much more beneficial to society for medicinal purposes and everything else like that. But just the fact that we go from something that could be, it's distillate, it's not the best part of the plant, it has potential heavy metals in there, to these much cleaner medical grade vape cartridges that have pure plant extract in them. Like, to get to a point where the working professional, or, you know, the mom and dad out on a Saturday night don't have to sit in the parking lot of the restaurant or the comedy club or the movie theater and smoke a joint and feel like a piece of shit, where they can kind of walk to the theater and hit their vape pen and kind of normalize it as much as drinking. To me, that's some of the biggest ways that we can move the industry forward, is just kind of coming out with these products that normalize the way we already consume. Now, I know there's a ton to rant about in there, but, you know, I'm sure you guys are seeing advances on both the consumer and medical side daily.
Well, and that's absolutely right. I mean, and I, again, I think that's just another indication, and you've described it quite eloquently, of the maturation of a consumer packaged goods industry. And so, you know, we have what you know, Brad Rogers once referred to as the mind release market, which you know, I think we'll call that the traditional space. And you're right, they're looking for particular formulations, particular products, and they have, you know, wants and needs that are very specific to that group. But again, if you're looking at, you know, where do we take this? Where does it go? We look at all of the companies that are looking to provide products and services that meet the needs, as you say, of the, you know, the joke is the soccer moms, and you know, the you know, like me, you know, the old white guys who play golf and hurt their shoulder or their neck or their back or their knees hurt or whatever. And whether it's topicals or some kind of you know, oral formulation that's designed for you know, anti-inflammation or pain relief, help you sleep as you get older. Again, there are just so many product categories that companies are able to explore and develop products that you know, when we look at the growth potential, you know, it's not just a case of the you know, the legal market looking to win back share for the illicit, from the illicit market for, you know, the mind release folks. It's to open up whole new product categories that begin to address a whole variety of consumer needs. And as you say, the association with particular lifestyles and sports and music and all of that, again, is just perfectly logical development and maturation of the industry in the consumer product space.
See, I love this because you know, you and your team, you're able to recognize these patterns that you see in the other industry and say like, oh, this is going to very closely model this. Whereas, you know, it's funny. I look at this industry and I asked this question a few years ago, and somebody I knew wrote a book on it. But um, cannabis eventually, and I think that this is not my opinion. A lot of people think this is not eventually. It's a commodity, right? And at some point in the next, I don't know, 2, 3, 5, maybe 8, 10 years, the cannabis industry is really, to me, it's going to be the weed industry, right? You're going to have adult use, recreational, and then you're going to have a nutraceutical industry where a lot of the CBD and other minor cannabinoids come out from a nutraceutical standpoint. Then you will have a true medicinal industry, which is where you have your pharmaceutical grade products, the ones that are very focused on it. And then to even continue on further, we'll have textiles and papers and everything else like that. So when we look at the cannabis industry, and I'm very guilty of this, it is so much more than just the smoking of marijuana or the medicinal part of marijuana. I think cannabis will be a commodity, and we will have these sub industries that pop up that won't just be called the cannabis industry. So like when I don't want to say when we go to MJ BizCon, we're not all going to be there, but MJ BizCon might turn into a adult use cannabis focused conference when you're going to have next door, instead of MJ Unpacked, maybe you're going to have the medical cannabis use conference, and then you're going to have, you know, the therapeutic cannabis use conference, and maybe MJ will house all of them. Obviously, I don't know a business model, but you see where I'm going here. And I feel like you guys kind of see that initially with the company, because, you know, we here in the States, and especially the people who watch this show, when we look at what's listed on the exchange, to us, we see the Curaleafs and the True Leaves and the AYRs and the Columbia Cares, but we tend to miss the true companies that have really just a pharmaceutical look and feel to them, where they have a pharmaceutical name and they're coming up with capsules or gels or true pharmaceutical grade stuff. And I'm sure a lot of that is what you guys are looking at to list on the exchange.
Well, that's a great point. And you know, one of the things that I think frustrates people is the slow pace of progress in the United States to support or create an environment where the pharmaceutical potential of cannabis is explored properly. It's still career death for a medical researcher to announce that they're going to go into the cannabis field in Canada, the United States, unfortunately. And you know, the restrictions in place are still so great that it is prohibitively expensive and difficult to do any proper clinical research at this point. Israel, where we have spent a good deal of time over the last 5 years, is probably the most advanced jurisdiction as far as doing clinical work and research. And we have a number of companies based in Israel listed on the exchange that are doing some very important work as both a nutraceutical and as a pharmaceutical supplement. And again, the promises of, or the preliminary indications on a whole variety of areas are so enormous. As I say, I think policymakers in Canada, the United States, are doing themselves a disservice by not creating a clear path for researchers and the pharma companies to actually pursue research in North America at this point. And again, it's a whole variety of things, whether it's antiviral, anti-inflammation, pain, anxiety, depression, a whole number of things, targeted cancer treatments even, that we're seeing researched in Israel at a preliminary level that could be incredibly important, and we're holding that back with the present policy framework. So, as I say, I would really like to see some advances made, not just, of course, on the THC side, but of course on the cannabinoid side through appropriate regulations of the hemp space as well. I mean, it's been a travesty to see what's happened to the hemp industry in Canada, the United States over the last 4 or 5 years. We should be way farther along than we are.
I couldn't agree with you more. And it's funny. Like, I think I've had this argument hundreds, not even an argument. It's an agreement with all my guests, because nobody argues it, that, you know, we just went through a global pandemic. You know, I know, again, I don't know that much I assume the Canadian economy and everything that you guys do is similar to ours. I'm going to say I'm an ignorant American and I just enjoy Canada when I'm there. I don't look into your economics and everything else, but we're a service-based economy and there's not a ton of manufacturing here, and farming is sucking wind as well. That we look at what the cannabis space overall, not just again the what I'll call the weed industry, right? And I'm going to call it the weed industry because that's where I am and that's what I work. And it kind of differentiates it, but we have the ability not only with the weed industry to create jobs, and those jobs are more blue collar focused. Like, listen, Google, Microsoft, SAP, they're doing a great job producing jobs for highly skilled technical people that understand computers and codings and things like that. And those are the jobs of the future. But there's still a lot of people that are really good at manual labor and they're really good at thinking outside the box when it comes to logistics and things like that. And it doesn't mean they're not computer folks. They don't want to be inside all day, right? So we have the opportunity to create jobs and tax revenues, but then we look even further beyond that, like you said, with hemp, and whether it's industrial hemp for textiles or for paper or anything else, it's huge topics in society right now are sustainability and jobs, and helping people whose industries are no longer existent. So what do we need? Well, truck drivers are going away. Well, this will put more trucks on the road. Farmers are not doing well. This is giving farmers more things to grow. This is bringing us back to our own production economy for both the US and Canada. It's something that we can manufacture and process here, maybe manufacture or at least grow here. They might send it elsewhere to manufacture and process. So to me, I look at policymakers and I'll say it because obviously I'm not that associated with the government in either country, but like it kind of pulls back the wool for me that it's like, oh, you guys don't have our best interest in mind, because this from the outside looks like it would solve a lot of problems, and you're not allowing it to happen because of decades old stigma based on people who had self-interest. Like we all know at this point, it was the hemp industry which demonized cannabis, Hearst and the rest of the group back then. We see the benefits now. We see what's going on in Israel, as you just mentioned. I don't understand what it's going to take for a lot of these legacy politicians to say, no, this is the future. It's not just about people smoking weed. That's maybe 5 to 10% of it at maturity. It is all these other amazing things. And maybe they just think we're crazy because we say this one plant can do all this. They're like, no, nothing does that. That's because you outlaw it. So, that's my rant. But that's the view that I take. It kind of, to me, I look at government, I'm like, you guys, there's something missing to where you don't see the things that me and the 30,000 people in MJ BizCon see, or the hundreds of thousands of people in the industry, or the tens of thousands of investors that are backing it see. I don't know. And again,
Well,
I know you guys are a lot closer to the government, so you're welcome to choose your words.
well, I have no stake in the government of the United States at the federal, state, or local level. So yeah, I guess I've got a free reign. But yeah, I think it is disappointing at the lack of progress. I think the reasons for it are complicated and profound. There are other interests at work, clearly. Not just the stigma attached to the plant itself, yep. But folks have got a vested interest in whether it's cotton or corn or some of the other crops that hemp has the potential to replace. Certainly for a number of applications. So again, it's will take, I think, a lengthy lobbying effort, policy consideration, and a lot of work from the industry to to get where we should be, because as you say, I think again, it's one of those issues that I'm certainly convinced, based on the science and the business, that we are on the right side of history on this one, and eventually, as we normally do, we get to the right answer, but just not as fast enough as perhaps we ought to most of the time.
I'm starting to see sometimes it takes Canadians to make us see correctly.
Well, as I say, we're kind of caught up in the same boat. There's potential for an enormous hemp cultivation industry here, and we don't have the rules either, because of course we're kind of because Canada is a relatively small market. Whether it's again specifically for cannabis or for the wellness products, or for all of the other industrial applications of the hemp plant, for example, we kind of wait for the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the FDA to get their act together. And as a result, we're kind of in a holding pattern as well.
Ugh. Well, hopefully one day we'll get there. And like I said, I do think you guys are on the right side of history. I think you guys have led the charge to help destigmatize and normalize the industry, allowing capital to come into these markets, allowing these companies to be able to do what they do. And you know, folks, if anybody out there is against corporate cannabis or anything else, if it wasn't for these massive companies getting to the size they were, your craft cultivators, all your smaller companies, they wouldn't have an industry to participate in, and they wouldn't have an opportunity to survive. And that's my opinion. You guys can argue me if you want, but because of moves like this, we have an industry that we can all be a part of, and we can all talk about the good and bad parts as we want. But that's my opinion here. So I've taken an hour of your time. Obviously I'd love to wrap up here. Anything that you're looking at that you guys have this year that you're expecting, you know, anything crazy? I know a lot of what you do is confidential, so anything cool we can look forward to the end of the year, or what does 2022 look like for you guys as far as things you're getting excited about?
Well, I think again, it's no secret that there was another cohort of companies that were founded after the the name brand MSOs who have stayed private, have taken down private equity funding, and they're now looking to come to the public markets as a result of the improvement in asset valuations we've seen over the last, I want to say, 4 or 5 months. And because every one of those companies is looking at either being acquired or raising additional capital to do some acquisitions and organically grow into new markets. Again, as we see more and more states legalize for adult recreational use or open up the medical market. So we're going to see, I think, a new cohort of companies from the United States that choose to list on the Canadian Securities Exchange. Again, because of the lack of progress on either descheduling or banking or financial relief from at the federal level. And so this is obviously a well-traveled road at this point. And we're obviously excited to work with this next generation of companies that will be coming to market. And investors, I think, should be really excited to see additional opportunities to participate in the growth of this industry. And so, yeah, that's what we got coming, I think, to the Canadian Securities Exchange near you in the coming 6 to 12 months.
That sounds awesome. I'm really excited for the new crop of single state and multi-state operators to start listing and things of that nature. I think there have been a lot of great companies that I've kind of admired from a distance from my little room here in Florida, and I'm excited to see them get the love and attention that they deserve. I want to take a second and plug your blogs and your website. I think you guys do a great job of educating people on the public securities and the industry. I think your entire crew who participates in those videos, and most of the crew that I know do participate in those videos. I joke. I say I started this podcast because I couldn't find a single cannabis podcast that I enjoyed listening to. Emily, Paxi, and Cy Scott came out with one, and then the ones that you guys have on your website. Thank God those didn't exist when I started, because I may not be sitting here today. So you guys have done a very good job with those.
Well, Todd, if I can get a plug in, we do have a YouTube channel, which is well subscribed, but we could use, as always, more subscribers. And we are constantly creating content with thought leaders from the industry, and of course, introducing our newly listed companies and providing opportunities for people to list it on the exchange to help tell their story to the investment community. So that is, if you plug in CSE TV on YouTube, we have great coverage and are constantly providing new content. And as you say, thecse.com is our URL for the website. And there's also a lot of content there. And of course, links to our work on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn as well. So, and I'm sure that I have missed 6 or 7 social media platforms that we're also on. I have not done anything to my knowledge on TikTok yet. But thank goodness, nobody wants to see this guy dancing for any number of seconds. But as I say, our team does a great job, and we look forward to obviously people taking advantage of the resources that we have created.
I look forward to you guys doing TikTok.
Well, me not so much, but yeah, you never know.
All right, Richard, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Todd. Thanks again.
Absolutely, folks. And thank you to everybody at home. After you go to CSTV on YouTube and subscribe, head over to youtube.com/elevate your grind. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to our channel. Folks, if you missed any part of this interview today, it will be live on our YouTube on Monday, youtube.com/elevate your grind. Of course, we have our entire list of library of videos there. And of course, if you don't have the time to sit in front of your computer and watch us, you can always listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcast from. Folks, we are done for the week. We will be live with you next week. I'm not sure who next week's guest is, as you can tell how great I've become at scheduling this show, but we will have an episode probably Wednesday or Thursday next week. It will be a great guest, and we'll see you then.